So I want to take the next 15, 20 minutes or so to talk to you guys about messaging. Before we get there, one of my very sharp-eyed colleagues pointed out that if we take the mess out of messaging, we get aging. We're not talking about aging. We're talking about the fact that messaging today is a mess. So why are we talking about messaging? What's interesting with messaging? Messaging has become probably the most popular way people connect with each other, people communicate with each other. To the extent we'd probably say messaging is the new chat. Let's take a look at a few numbers, right? See how that pans out. These are the top two networks these are the top two messaging platforms in the world today. And if you take the numbers together, they cover about a quarter of the world's population. And that does not even include the population covered by SMS. And that does not include the fact that a large part of the population does not have access to internet or a network. So that's a staggering number. If you look at a few more numbers, that's the number of messages that are sent every minute worldwide. And combined, that's about 60 million or so. Just in the US, according to estimates by CTIA, which is the wireless industry, we send about 1.8 trillion text messages in 2017. That's 1.8 trillion text messages in 2017. And if you look at the growth numbers that's just the growth figures of text messaging, just SMS. It grew 77 times over the last 10 years. That's, again, incredible numbers. And if you see in Nadine's presentation, I don't know if you guys noticed the SMS channel is also projected to grow. It's one of those lines that are projected to grow highly over the next 5 years or so. So messaging is definitely the most popular way people communicate with each other. And according to Gartner, it's the most popular app that people have right now is social media, and messaging is set to eclipse that as well. So then you might have the question, so what? People use text messages to communicate to each other, so what? We're a business. According to surveys, 89% of consumers want to use messaging to communicate with businesses. And primarily, this is because of the fact that messaging is easy. It's easy for a few reasons. It's easy because it fits into everybody's life. It's apps that you already have on the phone. You don't have to do anything new. You can pick up your phone and message a business. It's also easy because it does not put any demand on people's time. And if you listen to Ashu in the beginning of the day, one of the primary concerns for a consumer is time. Messaging puts no demand on it. You can send a message in, you can wait for the business to respond, and you can respond back at your convenience. So it is convenient, and it doesn't put any demand on your time. If you combine that with a couple of quotes from both Gartner and Forrester, you will see that there is a need for customer service in messaging. Messaging as a channel for customer service is going to grow. So let's take a look at what the challenges are today, because we started by calling messaging a mess, right? Why is it hard for businesses to get into messaging? So one of the things that we see, and we see this with nearly every new technology, every emerging technology, is silos. Because new technology is generally run by smaller groups within the organization. Messaging, with its pedigree in social media, is generally run by the social media arm of the organization. This causes silos of applications to build within the business, within the organization. Now, we all know what the issues are with silos. They're not connected. You don't have the same level of service. The customer satisfactions go down, etc. The next thing to consider is designing your journey when your feature set is extremely varied. So if you look at the lowest common denominator on messaging, that's your standard text. You can send 160 characters of text to somebody to communicate. That's the length of communication that you have. But if you go to the other end and you consider a channel like, say, Apple Business Chat, you can do everything from text to images to scheduling to payments on the same channel. So how do you design a journey that fits the SMS channel as well as the Apple Business Chat channel, right? The next thing, again, we talked about the fact that messaging does not put a demand on time, on the user's time. That leads to an interesting challenge on the business side. What is the acceptable cadence for the message going back? How often do you need to respond to this person? If you have a person sending you 2 messages, do you have to respond within seconds? Or do you have a few minutes to respond? How do you keep up the cadence? How do you measure what a good cadence is going to be? And while keeping the cadence, how do you maintain your agent's experience? How do you ensure that your agents have a continuous work stream of things that they can process? And in a disconnected stop-start kind of messaging scenario, how do you ensure your agent is equipped to handle that sort of messaging? So for example, you get a couple of messages which you have responded to. The customer goes away, and say an hour later, the customer comes back with another couple of messages. How do you route that back to the same agent? If you route it to a different agent, how do you provide the agent with context so that the agent can pick up an answer where it was left off? And last, again, not least, is how do you maintain compliance across all these channels? Some of these channels are secure, some of them are not secure. We know for a fact SMS is not secure. You cannot send PII, you cannot send health information across an SMS channel. So how do you maintain compliance across all these channels? So these are hard questions for businesses. And one of the things people tend to forget when we talk about messaging is proactive notifications. Just a quick stat for you guys, right? The first one's again a stat from CTIA. About 50+ million people will opt in to receive proactive notifications from businesses. That's by 2020. The second stat is actually from a customer of ours who is currently servicing about 41 million consumers via SMS for reminders on prescription refills and medical refills. So these, again, the promise of proactive notifications is also pretty high. So what I want to do next is to take a look at how can we tackle messaging? How can we make it easy to bring it into a business? And what do you need from a toolset perspective as well as from an organization perspective to bring messaging into the business? Right? So first thing that we feel with messaging is you need a messaging hub. The part that you do not want to get into is a silo. You do not want another silo being developed for messaging. So you need a hub that can bring the messaging channels in. Today, the popular channels are Facebook and WhatsApp. It's going to be Apple Business Chat in the future. There will be other channels. You also need the messaging hub to have the ability to tie those channels in with whatever your traditional channels are. Say, for example, web chat. So ease of adding new channels, ability to tie the channels together. And these become more important when we start looking at where messaging is headed. I give you an example of where we think messaging can go. So, for example, if you have a customer today who's interacting with you on a web chat, and halfway through the conversation, the customer says, "Oh, I got a flight to catch. I have to leave now." So your option today is you have to let the customer go. He's going to walk away, and there is no guarantee that he'll come back and talk to you. There's no guarantee you're going to solve his problem. What the advantage with technology like messaging is you can then start looking at things like channel hopping. You could tell the customer, "Oh, we understand that you need to leave. Let me send you an SMS. Reply when you can. So you can keep the conversation going on a channel that doesn't place demand for his time. So it gives him more convenience. It keeps the conversation going and improves customer satisfaction. So once you start with the messaging hub, that gives you the connection to all your different channels. To avoid silos, you need the next step, which is you need to connect that with your customer engagement platform. This is a picture of how the messaging hub within eGain is connected to our customer engagement platform. And you probably have seen it, and if you haven't seen it, please do take a look at it at the demo stations. We're showing this at the CX stations, and I think we're showing parts of this at the AX station as well. So in eGain, I'll talk about these pieces in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. What we do is we take the messaging hub. Any message coming in from any of the channel goes through an intent classifier, determines what the customer is trying to do. Once it goes through intent classification, we can then determine what's the best way to service this message. Do we want to send it through an automated VA, or do we want to send it directly to an agent, depending upon the type of the message, the customer that it's coming from, if we have identified the customer, and the intent. And once you get into a channel, regardless of whether it's an automated service channel or an agent service channel, you have the ability to seamlessly hand off to the other channel. So you can hand off from an automated process seamlessly to an agent, or from an agent back to an automated process. And I'll talk about that also in a second. So that's how the messaging hub is connected to the rest of the platform within eGain. So once you have the messaging platform, you connect it to your customer engagement platform, the next thing you need is automation. So automation is really key in a messaging application. One of the things that's distinct about messaging is you don't have control. In a traditional service world, you have control of the exact journey before which the customer decides to contact you. You can control to the point when you want to offer that web chat or when you want to offer that email. So you can design the journey that happens before the customer decides to contact you. In the world of messaging, you don't have that opportunity. They're going to go to your Facebook page, click on that thing that says message the business, and they will send you anything they feel like. So you need automation at the front end of it to at least identify the intent, classify what the message is. You can use that then to route the queries that are coming in. You probably also want automation to then engage the customers for the simpler queries that do not need to go to the agent, or specific troubleshooting problems which can automatically be handled by self-service. Again, I think I'm linking this back to what Ashu said in the beginning. Self-service is great as long as it is to the point and you don't overdo it. The other part is self-service is also quick, which means it saves the customer time at the end of it. So as long as you do self-service in places where it makes sense, this will actually improve CSAT. Lastly, you can use the same automation to be proactive, to send notifications out to customers before they contact you and avoid the contact altogether. This would go back to sending out reminders for status changes that may be happening, sending out reminders for prescription refills, etc. And lastly, once you have the automation part built, you need to augment automation with an agent. And this again goes back to the keynote from Ashu, where he mentioned the assurance part of automation. The customers need assurance that the automation is actually helping them. So it needs to be backed by a human interaction. So the thing with backing automation with human interaction is seamlessness. You need to be able to seamlessly transfer from AI into a human interaction. So the context that the AI has spent gathering, you want to transfer that. The last thing you want to do when a chat agent picks up a conversation that's already been processed by VA, is asked, oh, can you explain your problem to me? Or what is the last four of your social security number? Those are questions that the VA would have already processed. You need the entire context to come in. The other thing that we think is really interesting is, in a lot of cases, issues do get escalated to an agent. But as the agent goes through the problem, you would realize that this leads to a process that can be handled by automation. So the ability for the agent to then transfer back to an automated process that runs them down the problem solution is also key. It saves the agent time, and it makes the customer experience better. The next thing that you need in agent augmentation is conversations. Now, traditionally in a customer service world, everything is defined by case boundaries, and case boundaries are very rigid. Okay, you start an interaction with a person, interaction ends, you have a couple of interactions, case ends. It doesn't span the amount, it doesn't mimic what would happen if two people were interacting. When two people interact, you talk about a thing for a certain period of time, you may go away, when you come back, you pick up where you left off. That becomes a longer-lived conversation. So you need to be able to expand the boundary of the case and look at it in the form of a conversation. And this goes back to providing the agent with the tools that they need to process the messages coming in. So when, for example, when an agent picks up a conversation that is continued from a previous one, you need the ability for the agent to just look at it in a conversational form, not have to go through all the cases that may have been created. So the conversational view is really critical to messaging, because that's the view that the customer sees. That's the view that the customer expects the agents to see, and that's the view the customer expects the agent would know about. So it's all about matching customers' expectations with what the agent is able to do. And lastly, you need a seamless agent experience across all networks. And we talked about this. The feature set of each network is very different, at least today. Eventually, we may have more similarity between the networks, but today, the feature set is extremely different. If you start with, we talked about how SMS is just text and how Apple Business Chat can handle pace. But you need that level of complexity to be insulated. You need the agent to be insulated from that level of complexity. You need the system to be able to handle that complexity and provide the agent with a seamless interface that looks the same across all channels, and that can interact with all channels and provide the richness. That's the last piece of the agent desktop that you need. Our solution that we have right now in no way is complete with all of these things. There are a few things that we're still working on in terms of messaging. So some of the things that we're still working on, and we have some ideas about it, are workforce planning. So we talked about it. How do you plan for a workforce when your conversation starts and stops all the time? How many agents do you need to staff it? So we have some ideas around it. How do you balance the needs of AX and CX? What do the customers expect in terms of a cadence? How does the agent know that's what the customer is expecting? And how do you match that and make sure the agents still have enough work to do? And lastly, the impact on contact center metrics. So the metrics today deal with call handle times, first call resolutions, etc. When you have a conversation that could span days, how do you handle first call resolution? What is first call resolution if you're getting 2 messages every day? These are interesting things that we're working on. We have a few ideas, but we would love to hear from you on what your thoughts are on this as well. So if you have experimented with messaging, we'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on these. We'll be at the demo booth. I will be there. So will the entire product management team. So come have a conversation with us, and we can talk more about these. Thank you, guys.